There have perhaps been more periods of rise and decline in Iran than any other civilization, as despite being pillaged and ravaged by countless invaders such as the Mongols, Greeks, Arabs, or others, they've always seemed to rebuild and reform into an even greater empire than before, and reaffirm their identity under the greater pan-ethnic label of Iranian, which is actually not synonymous with Persian as many think. I can tell you from experience that the vast majority of Iranians really don't like being thrown under the label of Arab or simply Muslim, as is callously done by so many American or other Western media outlets, as only a small minority of people in Iran are actually ethnically Arab, and similar to Egypt, even though they are Muslim, and quite devout to say the least, their pre-Islamic conquest identity, stretching back thousands of years, is still extremely important and a source of national pride, leading to resentment over its seeming erasure by those less knowledgeable over their history. The Iranian or Iranic group consists of at least a dozen distinct people groups and are part of the Indo-Iranian family, which, if you've been paying attention, is the other half of the Indo-European family, meaning their languages and many of their lineages are shared with the Europeans, even though the Iranians have a Southwest Eurasian racial base and have been heavily influenced linguistically by other Middle Eastern languages. The ancestors of the modern Indo-Iranian peoples migrated southeast many thousands of years ago and are thought to have split in roughly 2000 BC, with the Indo-Aryans giving rise to Sanskrit, the lingua franca of northern South Asia, that evolved to many of the languages we see there today, such as Hindi, Punjabi, Marathi, or Bengali, effectively being the Latin of the Indian subcontinent, while in Iran, the two main languages were Persian and Median, and I've mistakenly said in the past that the Kurds, one of the larger Iranian peoples, were descended from Persians, when it was in fact the Medes, whose empire predated much of the Persian expansion in the region. The Iranian peoples who stayed in the steppes and diverged significantly from those in the south inhabited mostly Eastern Europe and Central Asia, with the largest and most famous being the Scythians, who never had a unified state or empire but spread out from Siberia to Ukraine, with other steppe Indo-Europeans being the Bactrians, Sogdians, Sarmatians, Alans, or Saka, who were believed to be the race most genetically similar to Europeans by genetic testing and historical accounts, and gradually were absorbed by incoming Slavic, Turkic, or even other Iranian populations. Those in the Middle East evolved into many different groups over the millennia, although the Persians became the dominant power, which is why the Achaemenid, Sasanian, and Safavid dynasties are all referred to as the Persian Empire, despite being multi-ethnic conglomerations spread out over several thousand years. And Iranian influence actually stretches even further than this, as a huge segment of the non-immigrant populations of the Gulf Arab states, such as Oman, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, and especially Qatar, are of Iranian origin, mostly Bailush in Oman and Persian in the other states, while another large portion of the population is of Pashtun origin from more recent Afghan refugees and Pakistani migrants. Although the largest Iranian group is the Persians, there are also several smaller ethnicities spread out over Southwest Asia and elsewhere, perhaps the most famous being the Kurds, which includes the Gorani, Zaza, and Yazidis, who are the most well-known example of a stateless nation being spread out over Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Smaller groups include the Galaki, Talish, and Mazandarani, whose languages and people are all quite similar, referred to as the Caspian peoples due to their border on the Caspian Sea, and these people are definitely ethnically distinct from the Persians further south, whose languages are not mutually intelligible. The Pashtun are the dominant group in Afghanistan, as Afghan is another term for Pashtun, and they also make up a large portion of northwest Pakistan as well. What becomes a bit confusing is the Amak, Hazara, and Tajik peoples in the east, who all speak mutually intelligible dialects of Persian, yet sometimes consider themselves to be ethnically distinct, especially the Hazara, who have a large amount of Turkic and Mongolian influence in their genes and language, being around 50% Eastern Eurasian in origin. Persians and other Iranian groups have also historically had a large impact on other regions such as Anatolia, the Levant, the Caucasus, the western coast of the Indian subcontinent, and especially the Swahili coast of East Africa, with the Shirazi tribe of the greater Swahili people having Persian ancestry from ancient migrants and merchants who settled in the region. The Persians were one of the first peoples to be conquered after the expansion of Islam after the death of Muhammad, mainly due to depleted resources and manpower following decades of prolonged conflict with the Byzantine Empire, and the Persians and other Iranians traded the traditional Zoroastrian religion for Islam over many generations. Now, although the Arabs had a significant impact on their culture, they didn't become assimilated into the Arab world as many other groups in the Middle East had. The reason that Persia changed its name to Iran in the mid-20th century is a contentious and debatable subject, although it does make sense from a national standpoint, as only 50 to 70% of Iranians are actually ethnically Persian. Solidarity and nationalism between the greater Iranian peoples grew in the region mostly as a response to calls of Arab or Turkish irredentism, with Iran having minorities of both Arabs and Turks, therefore threatening their territorial integrity, although even before this there were calls for the unification of the Pashtun nation split between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and of course the Kurds, who had been calling for an independent state since before the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and they still do to this day. And lastly, the Ossetians in the middle of the Caucasus region are essentially the last of the Alans or Scythians, so the current Iranian peoples are spread out over many countries, more or less inhabiting this fairly contiguous crescent-like shape spanning from the Tashkurgan Tajik Autonomous County in China to northern Kurdistan in Turkey. So therefore, if there were to be a unification across the whole of the Iranian realm, it would be far simpler than other similar scenarios we've covered in the past, as in the west, the new Pan-Iranian country would include the Kurdish-inhabited regions of southeast Turkey, northeast Syria, and northern Iraq, as well as the Ossetian regions of Russia and Georgia. And staying true to form, however, we would have to exempt parts of Khuzestan province in Iran, which are majority Arab, as well as the Turkic majority regions near the Caspian Sea in the north, although some have argued that Azerbaijanis are merely Iranians who speak a Turkic language, as they were previously Iranian peoples conquered and assimilated by incoming Turks. In the east, we would include nearly all of Tajikistan and Afghanistan, excluding the northern regions, which is majority Turkmen and Uzbek, as well as including the bulk of western Pakistan, as Pakistan is divided between Iranic, Indic, and Dardic peoples, and is actually quite a diverse country, contrary to popular belief. The extent to which Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are Iranian is up for debate, with some claiming that as high as a third of Uzbekistan's population is ethnically Tajik, yet linguistically assimilated into the Uzbek majority, although official statistics claim only 5 to 10%, so that's the number we'll go with. And despite the label of Tajiks, the Iranians of China actually belong to a group known as the Pamiris, with a common origin with the Pashto language, and also in Tajikistan are the Yagnabis, who are the last descendants of the Sogdians, an eastern Iranian tribe formerly inhabiting much of Central Asia. All this adds up to around 204 million people, pretty close to our approximation for a pan-Turkic country, living in around 1.3 million square miles or 3.4 million square kilometers, a population density about the same as Tajikistan now, being the highest in the eastern portion near the subcontinent, and having an economy around $2.7 trillion, about the same per capita GDP of Egypt or Tunisia. The Persians, Caspians, Lurs, and Hazaras are all predominantly Shia, which actually didn't take place until the last few hundred years, and since then Iran has become the center of the Shia community worldwide, although large Shia populations do exist on the other side of the Persian Gulf, most notably the nation of Bahrain and scattered throughout the Arab world, which has led to some tensions to say the least. Another unique form of Islam seen in the Iranian peoples is Alevism, predominantly in the Kurdish community of southwest Anatolia, described as a more progressive, moderate form of Islam, similar to that practiced by the Alawites in neighboring Syria, and as seen as heretical by some other Muslims, which is a similar situation to the Druze of the Levant, although they're not quite as strict in terms of tradition or endogamy as the Druze, which is formed into a unique ethno-religious community with influence from many other faiths. A large percentage of Iranian Kurds practice a unique syncretic religion known as Yarsanism, considered by most to be an Islamic sect with a large amount of influence from the pre-Islamic Kurdish religion, similar to that practiced by the Yazidis. Most others, such as the Kurds, Pashtuns, Baluch, and Tajiks, are Sunni, with a small Christian minority made up mostly of ethnic Armenians, Assyrians, or recent converts, as well as a small population of Yazidis, Zoroastrians, Jews, and other religious groups. And the official irreligious segment is quite small, but in this region of the world especially, the atheist or irreligious population is likely far higher than statistics imply. The largest ethnicity would of course be the Persians at about a fourth of the population, although when including the Persian-speaking Tajiks and Hazaras, this increases to nearly 40%, with the next largest Iranian groups being the Pashtun, Kurdish, Baluch, Caspians, Lurs, and other smaller groups. The largest ethnic minority would be those of Turkic ancestry dispersed throughout all territories, with smaller numbers of Europeans, mostly of Russian stock, Arabs, South Asians, and even a small community with African ancestry of mostly slave origin, who are less common in Iran than in Arab countries, confined mostly to the coast of Iran and Pakistan. Keeping with tradition, if we wanted to turn this into an Iranian wank, we could include all of Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Northern Caucasus, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, since these are sometimes considered to be traditional Iranian lands, and the latter three were formerly inhabited by Iranian peoples before their conquest and subsequent assimilation into the Turkic realm, as well as including the Shia-dominant regions of the Arab world and the regions around the Persian Gulf, which again have historically had a huge impact from ancient Iranians, and in the present day to a certain extent as well. We could break it down into Iran, Greater Iran, and Greatest Iran, the latter being all areas that were ever inhabited by or under the control of any Iranian people group. Now we're passing into the boundaries of absurdity, but this just goes to show the massive amount of power and influence the Iranian peoples held in ancient times up to the present, and I don't know, maybe I like the shape of this one. After all, I did have a great-grandmother who was ethnically Galaki. Overall, the Iranian peoples are spread out over many different countries, influencing many different regions and modern countries, and it would of course be an improbable yet interesting prospect to have the whole of the Iranian realm unite as a single country. So go ahead and let me know your thoughts on today's thought experiment, and for today's poll, tell me which Iranian group you'd like to learn more about. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.